A few weeks ago, Andrea went to Costco with the kids while I was at home studying, of course. And while she was there, she saw some nativity scenes. So she snapped a picture of one and sent it to me and said, "Guess how much this costs?" And if you've ever been to Costco, you'll know that everything near the front of the store costs an outrageous amount of money. So I said $800. I was way off. It was like about $200, but still, it's a lot of money for a nativity. I don't know if that's a good deal or not. But the thing that really struck me when she sent me this picture was, hey, Costco still sells nativity scenes. Isn't that interesting? Our society's pushing a lot of religion, a lot of Christianity out the door as quickly as possible. But certain aspects of the Bible's version of the Christmas story are still very well commercialized. We still like those. I take it's because in the nativity scene particularly, we get all the positive parts of the Christmas story. It's a very nice scene. Of course, you've got baby Jesus there with his parents very happy that their firstborn son. You got the angels singing. You've got the shepherds, and we like the shepherds because they're kind of lowly and, they're kind of like the underdogs. And then, of course, the Magi show up with the first ever Christmas presents. It's wonderful, and we love it. But what about the negative side of the Christmas story? What about the dark part of what the Bible has to say? King Herod's horrifying massacre of all those little boys in Bethlehem. Now, that's certainly not going to commercialize very well at a shop front. We know that. It is interesting, though, in Luke's gospel, we get a really wonderful story, don't we? Jesus has been born, the angels come, they are singing, they're proclaiming good news. The shepherds, they go and they're proclaiming to everyone that the Christ has been born. And then Luke adds this lovely little summary ending to the story where he says, Mary treasured up all these things and she pondered them in her heart. It's wonderful. But it was not wonderful. It was not a peaceful night when Mary and Joseph had to get up and flee to Egypt because Herod was coming after them. And it was no happy ending to Matthew's account when all those boys were killed. Even the way that Matthew ends the story in verse 18. Read it with me if you've got your Bible open. This quote from Jeremiah, "A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they're no more." And that's the end of the Christmas story from Matthew. We move on to the next section in Jesus' life. What are you doing, Matthew? Christmas is meant to be a joyful story. Why would you end it like that? If you were here last week in the evening for the carol service, Leighton preached on Luke chapter 2, the great peace and joy of Christmas, based on Luke's account. Why couldn't Matthew do that? Make the story not so tragic. Not such a depressing ending. Why would he do that? Well, Matthew's trying to be honest. He's trying to tell us something really honest about the nature of the Christmas story. To some people, the birth of Jesus is a cause of celebration. It is a wonderful time of peace and joy, namely everyone in the nativity scene. They were there to celebrate. But to others, the Christmas story is not something they want to celebrate. It's something that's actually quite offensive to them. To them, the Christmas message, a king has been born, is an offensive one. Because the message really is this. The Bible's Christmas message is that Jesus is king, not you. And that's not a message our prideful hearts like to hear. You're not the ruler, not even over your personal life. You don't get to call the shots, someone else does. And his name is Jesus. You can resist him. You can try to ignore him. As we'll see, those are the two responses that Matthew records after the birth of Jesus. But both of those are in vain. You can't get around the fact that Jesus is king. And that the only correct response is to bow down and worship him. And that is very offensive to anyone who doesn't want to bow down. No one was more offended than King Herod, as we can see in the story. Now, King Herod the Great, that's what he's known in history. There's two things, if you don't know about Herod, you want to know two things about him. First of all, he didn't get the title Herod the Great for no reason. He was a great high achiever. One of the things that he was really well known for is construction projects, and the big one was the renovation of the temple in Jerusalem. Back when Solomon originally built the temple hundreds of years before that, it was this marvelous wonder, a total masterpiece. And then it got destroyed by the Babylonians. Then under Ezra, the temple gets rebuilt, the second temple, but it just doesn't compare. It's nowhere near as good as the first one, until Herod comes along to give the first one a run for its money by covering it in gold and renovating it to make it one of the wonders of the ancient world. It's quite up there. So that's Herod the Great. He did some great things. However, the pages of history tell us something else about Herod, that he was quite mad. You might say he had a few screws loose in the brain. He suffered from serious paranoia. He was worried about so many things. And after reading this story, you could probably guess, of all the things that he would be paranoid about, what's going to be on the top of his list? Someone's trying to take my throne. Someone is going to kick me out. In fact, he was so paranoid, he killed his own firstborn son because he thought his son would try to kill him and take the throne. So he's like, well, I'll get rid of that guy, the heir to the throne. So he was quite paranoid, quite mad. But at the same time, he was very clever. He was Herod the Great. And he knew what he was doing as a king and how to make it. So when we get to verse 2 then, and the Magi have come in to see Herod in Jerusalem, you're probably thinking, well, either the Magi were really, really brave, or maybe a bit naive and they didn't know that much about Herod, because the last thing you're going to do is knock on Herod's door and say, hey, Herod, I heard your replacement's been born. Do you know where he is? You know that's not going to end well. So now to Herod's mind, there's a threat to the throne. We've got to sort this out. Now, is it a serious threat? Well, he certainly takes it very seriously. But interestingly, his first move is to call in the priests and the teachers of the law, and he asks them, where's the Messiah going to be born? Gee, Herod, that's an interesting thing to do. What makes you jump to that conclusion so quickly? Why would you just assume that this apparent newborn king is God's promised Messiah? Well, see, what Matthew's trying to tell us is that Herod knew exactly what was going on. Herod knew what he was doing. He knew. He heard that the King of the Jews has been born. He knows that's referring to the Messiah. He goes straight to the Old Testament scriptures to find out, where is he? Where's he going to be born so I can track him down? Then, of course, he sends the Magi there, which means he believed what the scriptures said. Why would he do any of that unless he believed that the prophecies were true? The prophecy from Micah chapter 5, verse 2, the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. It's funny how he takes that prophecy very seriously, but he doesn't have a lot of time for some of the other prophecies about the Messiah, such as Psalm 2, Psalm 110, Daniel chapter 7, which describe the Messiah as this glorious king who no other king could ever defeat, who will all bow down to this Messiah, whose kingdom will know no end, who will have all power and dominion. For such a clever man, that doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? Of course, it's not a problem of intelligence or logical thinking. It's a problem of Herod's heart. Contempt at the notion that someone would be king instead of him. That someone else could rule and tell him what to do. Tell him how he needs to live his life. What other than a hard heart of hatred towards God could cause someone to massacre a town full of babies. But that is the condition of the human heart. That's how much we desire control over our own lives. Not to trust in the Lord who made us and know what's best for us, but to rebel against him. Romans 3, verses 11 to 12, no one seeks God. All have turned away and become worthless. No one does good, not even one. Rebellion against God is the mark of humanity. Now, someone might say, well, hold on a second, we're a lot better. That was 2,000 years ago. We've really civilized ourselves by now. We've learned from our mistakes. We don't even have kings anymore. We elect a prime minister who can't even do anything. So, it's totally safe. We've got laws to keep control of the government. People can't just go around murdering innocent babies anymore, can they? Well, the abortion statistics would beg to differ. See, nothing's really changed. The human heart still longs to rebel against the Maker and his design. We just put a different face on it, don't we? The thing is that it's all in vain. Psalm 2. Why do the people plot in vain? Why do the kings of the earth rise up against the Lord's anointed? You can rebel, but it won't get you anywhere except in a mess. We see that with Herod. He didn't succeed in what he was trying to do. You think about it, it's not a hard task to track down a baby, but he couldn't do it. All he did was wreak havoc and destroy families. Rebellion against God never succeeds. It only brings pain and judgment. Now, I'm sure that you probably have many friends who are unbelievers who you would say they're not like that at all. It would be pretty insulting to say, oh yes, you're just like Herod. You wouldn't say that, I think, to many unbelievers. You probably know lots of people, they have a relatively strong moral compass. They're not angry at God or actively cursing him all day long. They're not anti-religion, they're not anti-church, they just want to live their life with God out of the picture. They just want to ignore. They just want to cruise along and be happy with the way they are. Well, there's another kind of unbeliever in Matthew's account just like that. The priests and the scribes, or the teachers of the law. Herod's reaction is hatred, fighting against God's king. But the priests and the teachers, they just act completely indifferent or ignorant of this news. The priests were the people in charge of running the temple. They'd organize all the sacrifices and those kinds of things. But another part of their job is that they had to teach the Old Testament law to the people. They had to explain it, help make sure that people understood the law. And then the other group of people, this is in verse 4, the other group of people, the teachers of the law, it kind of goes without saying, they were teaching the law as well. The original word there is actually scribes, which basically means experts in the law. So that's why they could teach it. They knew the law. They knew it back to front in their sleep. They knew the Old Testament. So we've got a group of people here who are so well versed in the scriptures. Hence why they can answer, Herod's question, where's the Messiah going to be born? Oh, easy. Prophets, Micah chapter 5, Bethlehem. There you go, Herod. Question answered. They knew the scriptures so well. So more than anyone, they should have known how significant this event was. We hear the Messiah's been born in Bethlehem. Let's get down there. Let's go find him. Let's anoint him as God's new king. This is fantastic. We've been studying the scriptures all our lives, waiting for this guy to show up. This is awesome. But they don't do that. What do? We have no idea. They just disappear from the story. Back to the temple, back to work. Or, just go home. I did my duty for today, answer the king's question. They knew these prophecies in the Psalms and in Daniel chapter 7. They knew what kind of person the Messiah was going to be. In fact, if you look in verse 6, when these guys literally quote from the prophet Micah, it says, the Messiah will shepherd my people. That's the kind of king he'll be, like a shepherd. He's going to protect his people. He's a good king. And they could have easily, they knew the Old Testament, they would have cross-referenced that to Ezekiel chapter 34, which would have been really well known to them, which talks about the Lord as the shepherd who's going to rescue his people. He's going to be their king. He's going to bring them into green pastures. He's going to heal them. He's going to protect them from all their enemies. This was good news. They should have been ready to join the side of the new king. So why didn't they warn Herod? Don't fight this guy. This is great. You should be celebrating that this guy's been born, this Messiah. Or maybe they didn't want to do that, because they'd probably get their head chopped off, like what happened to John the Baptist when he questioned Herod. Okay, well maybe they could have gone and found Mary and Joseph and said, look, Herod's coming to get you. Get out now. We need to protect God's Messiah. They don't do that. They don't do anything. Why not? Well, the answer is that the priests and the teachers of the law had probably gotten really used to their lives under Herod's reign. Like I said, Herod was very clever. He didn't renovate the temple out of the generosity of his heart. When he got to be king, he would have thought to himself, how do I get the most power? How do I secure my influence? And everyone in Israel knows that the most important place is the temple. You get the people on the temple, the teachers of the people, you get them on your side, you got nothing to worry about. So he renovates the temple. Gets the priests and then the teachers to have a good high, what a good king. He renovated God's temple. That's great. Sure, they would have had their issues with Herod. He was a very immoral man in the way that he ruled. But they could have turned a blind eye to some of those things. And they certainly weren't willing to gamble off all that they had gained under him. Their power and influence, their wealth. We can't risk this. Maybe this isn't even the real Messiah. Maybe it's just some baby. We can't take the risk. Or even if it is the Messiah, what if he's not as good? What if he doesn't give us a deal as what Herod's giving us right now? So they do nothing. They don't react to the birth of the king because they don't want to risk changing their comfortable lives. Jesus is just a threat to their freedom, a threat to their personal autonomy. If we follow Jesus, we might lose all this good stuff. We might end up with a restrictive life. I don't want that. I'm happy with the way things are now. The thing is, though, it didn't last. Because sure enough, when Jesus grew up and started his ministry, the priests and scribes couldn't ignore him. They hated his guts. They're probably thinking, gee, I'm glad I didn't bow down to that guy. I can't stand him. Wouldn't have been worth having Herod chop my head off. I think I made the right move. Their indifference, their ignorance didn't last. It turned to hatred. And they just become the same as Herod, plotting to kill God's king. So in the final analysis, there's only two options. There's no indifference. There's no middle ground. There's no sitting on the fence when it comes to Jesus. You're either for him or you're against him. You either declare that Jesus Christ is king and you bow down, or you remain a rebel and an enemy. Wow, Matthew, that's pretty offensive. You're killing the Christmas vibe. Where's your Christmas spirit? Where's the joy and the peace? We got to be inclusive. We got to welcome everyone in. That's not a very nice thing to say. You can't say that at Christmas time. Say it all the other months of the year, but don't say it in December. Bow down to the king or be his enemy. What an offensive thing to say. Well, of course, it's only offensive, though, if you want to be in control. It's only offensive if you see Jesus as a king who's going to interfere with your life, who's going to take away your freedom and restrict things. It's only offensive if you want to be indifferent. If you want to say, I'll just leave Christianity alone, but Christianity calls back to you, no, you can't. You have to choose. You either submit to Jesus or you face his judgment. Pretty offensive stuff. But not to everyone. To others, the message that Jesus is king and you are not is liberating. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, Paul says that the gospel message to some is an aroma of death, but to those who are being saved, an aroma of life. What's the difference? When you come to understand who Jesus is as a king, his goodness and his grace, then the Christmas message stops being offensive. It does become a message of peace and joy. It becomes a message of hope, that sins can be forgiven, that I no longer face death and hell, and that I can actually experience a full, proper life right now. Far from restricting things, life actually becomes better and liberating. And that's what the rest of Matthew's gospel goes on to proclaim. This is the King Jesus. This is the guy that you want ruling over you. This is the king you want. He doesn't take away freedom. He says, freely I give to you. He gives freedom. Freedom from the power of sin and death. Freedom to live life the way it's supposed to be. Freedom to have his Holy Spirit to give you the power to live well. This is a king who's patient with you when you fail. This is the king who says, I'll forgive you 70 times 7, over and over again. No matter how many times you fail, I'll forgive. This is a king who doesn't overload you. He doesn't give you burdens. He doesn't load you up with things that you can't handle. He says, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. He lightens the load. This King Jesus, unlike Herod, who kills innocent children for his own personal gain, Jesus does the opposite. As an innocent man, he allows himself to be killed for the gain and benefit of others, of evildoers like us. Why would anyone resist a king like that? Isn't that the king that you want to bow down and worship? Don't you want to place your life in the hands of someone who's going to shield you from even death? Don't you want to say to Jesus, you have authority. You have all the power. You have all the control, knowing that he's going to use it to die in your place. That's a king worth bowing to and worshipping. And that's the king who, of all people, these group of men called Magi from the east come all the way to worship. And this is the great irony of Matthew's Christmas story, is that Herod, the king, and the priests and scribes of the temple, they should have known better than anyone to go and find this king and bow down. They should have been the most excited. They should have been filled with joy when they saw the star. But they don't. Instead, it's some men from a faraway country who have no obligation to be here. We have no idea if they'd even read the Old Testament scriptures. They see a star and they follow it by faith, and God leads them to their king. They show up to worship him and honor him with their gifts. So those who ought to have recognized Jesus, those who ought to have bowed down, don't, and those who had no reason to recognize him, they do. It just goes to show that it really doesn't matter whether you grew up in a Christian family or whether you come from having no background whatsoever, you've gone to church your whole life, whether you've been spending your whole life hating and cursing God, or whether you just know absolutely nothing about him at all. What matters is that you bow down and worship the King. What matters is that we know our place. He is above and we are beneath. He's in control, we are not. What happens then when you've already submitted to Jesus the King? You've said to him, you're in control. I've repented of my sins. I believe and trust in you. But then that desire for control still lingers in our heart. just today, I don't really, want to follow what Jesus says. I'll come back to him tomorrow. Today I'll just rebel for a little bit. Don't you ever get frustrated that Jesus gets to call all the shots? Don't you ever think, if I was God, I'd probably do things a little bit differently? Is there that one place in the Bible where you think, man, I really wish that one wasn't in there? Take that verse out. Maybe not. Maybe instead of feeling frustrated with God's ways, maybe you're just feeling indifferent about your Christian walk. The temptation to neglect. Just like the priests and the scribes were indifferent towards Jesus. Lack of interest, you enjoying the things of this life and forgetting about the glories. You're missing the glories of Christ and He's in the gospel. And then you get that guilty Christian conscience that comes along and says, I need to put some more effort in. I'll set a reminder on my phone, make sure I read the Bible tomorrow. I'll get another Christian to keep me accountable so I don't fall into sin again. And we need those things. They're essential. But those things won't necessarily persuade our hearts to spiritual living. We can't reason our hearts with good ideas to follow God better. The solution to these feelings and these temptations is the same solution when we became a Christian. The same thing that the Magi did. You come to the King and you bow down. Because our hearts were made to worship God. That's what we're designed for. So only when we come to know Him, when we come to worship Him, only that sets our hearts on the right track. We need to come down. Bow down before our King. Put Christ in His rightful place. He is above, we are below. Pray to the Lord, you are King, not me. You're the one worthy of worship. You're the good shepherd who leads me to the green pastures. You know better, even though my heart says otherwise. Because if you fail to see how mighty and glorious the King is, if you don't give Him the honor He deserves, then you won't trust His words. You won't rejoice in His ways. The Christian life begins by bowing down, and it continues to the very end by bowing down. It doesn't stop there. In Revelation, what are the 24 elders doing in heaven? Eternally bowing down to Christ, the everlasting King. Now, these Magi from the east, look, we don't know about their past. We don't really know anything about them other than that they came from the east and that they have a funny name. We don't know what happened afterwards either, after they went home. Did they remain believers? Did they stay committed to worshipping Christ the King? Matthew simply doesn't tell us. Maybe Matthew just didn't know. But what we know for sure is that the Magi came and put Jesus in His rightful place. He is the King on high. Matthew says, look at these guys. Even they came to worship the King. So that's Matthew's Christmas message. Bow down to King Jesus. Worship Him. Know that He is the King, not you. To resist Him or ignore Him is in vain. It's only going to bring pain and judgment. But if we serve the King, if we place ourselves at His feet and worship, that's where true freedom and life are found.